They toasted my retirement from the family bakery with champagne I had bought. Then, 3 hours later, while they were still posting celebratory selfies, I sold the entire business out from under them to their oldest competitor. They did not learn about it until the new sign went up, under new ownership, their rival. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. My name is Walter. I am 68 years old, a widower, a grandfather, and for 35 years I poured concrete and built small warehouses along the Ohio River. My hands are thick, my back aches every morning, and I know numbers, contracts, and how quickly a smile can turn into a knife when money is on the table. Since Margaret passed 8 years ago, the center of my world has been my family, what's left of it. My son Nate, his wife Bree, and their little girl Lily live 30 miles south. My daughter Karen lives 2 states away with her husband, a man who collects vintage motorcycles but not responsibilities. My younger brother Ray is a retired teacher with a temper that runs hot but short. Holidays usually bring us all together, though lately, it's mostly been me driving to see them. Nate and Bree run a bakery in town, Sweet Briar, named after her. During the pandemic, they were heroes, feeding hospital staff for free, selling out of bread by noon. But as the world opened back up, customers thinned. I heard it in Nate's voice whenever I called. He always said, "We're fine," but the pauses grew longer. 2 summers ago, they called me together, voices shaking. Bree tried to explain between breaths, flour invoices piling up, the landlord threatening eviction over 3 months' rent, the bank starting to make noises no small business wants to hear. Nate took the phone. "How much?" I asked, already bracing myself. 80 to catch up. 100 to breathe, Nate said. $180,000. That's not a patch job, that's a rescue mission. But Lily was 9, and she thought the world of her parents' pink cupcakes and Saturday morning muffin samples. I pictured her in that flour-dusted apron, grinning up at customers like each one was a celebrity. I couldn't stand the thought of her watching her parents' dream close. So I drove down the next morning with a thermos of black coffee, my old leather briefcase, and a yellow legal pad. I wasn't just going to hand them money. I was going to save this bakery, because that's what family does. We laid it all out at their little kitchen table, the smell of yesterday's cinnamon rolls still lingering in the air. In exchange for $180,000, I would receive 51% ownership through a member-managed LLC, plus the building's lease assigned to that LLC. I made it clear I wasn't about to meddle in sprinkles or scones, those were their craft, not mine. My role would be cash flow, vendor negotiations, and keeping the lights on. We added 2 clauses I insisted on, not because I didn't trust them, but because I had learned over decades in construction that good fences make good neighbors, especially in business. The first was a right to replace management if the bakery missed 2 consecutive vendor payments. The second was a drag-along right if I found a buyer willing to pay at least 1.5 times the trailing 12 months' revenue. Both were written in plain English, and Nate actually chuckled, saying, "Dad, that's fine, we'd never let it get to that point." On July 14, 2023, they signed the agreement in the small office of a notary down the street from the bakery. The notary stamped it with a floral pen that Bree thought was so cute she actually asked where to buy one. Lily, who had tagged along, sat in the corner with a pink crayon, drawing cupcakes on the back of an old menu. We saved the bakery that day. I wired the money that Friday morning before breakfast, and by Monday, a delivery truck was unloading 50-pound sacks of flour and sugar in the alley out back. The relief in Nate's face was almost physical, like watching someone put down a weight they'd been carrying too long. The weeks that followed were good. Sweet Briar smelled like heaven again, the glass display cases were full every morning, and Bree started posting cheerful videos online of Lily helping decorate cookies. Customers came back, drawn by the warmth that had always been the bakery's real secret ingredient. By Christmas, they were profitable again, modestly, but solidly in the black. I never took a dime in distributions. Every extra dollar went toward a custodial college fund for Lily that I opened quietly at my bank. I only told Nate and Bree about it once, sliding the statement across their counter one Sunday afternoon while Lily was in the back licking frosting off a spoon. Nate stared at the numbers for a long time, blinking fast. Bree set her hands on her hips, shook her head slowly, and then came around the counter to hug me so hard my ribs creaked. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "You've already done so much." Nate just said, "Dad, thank you. Really. I don't know how we'll ever repay you." I believed them. Back then, I truly believed every word. Lily and I had always been close, but the bakery brought us into each other's worlds in a way that felt new. On Saturdays, I would pick her up before sunrise, and we'd walk into Sweet Briar together, her in a tiny apron I had bought with her name stitched across the front in red thread. She'd stand on a stool behind the counter, carefully sprinkling sugar over trays of muffins while I manned the register for the morning rush. The customers adored her. She had this habit of drawing little smiley faces on napkins and slipping them into coffee cups when she thought I wasn't looking. More than once, I'd find a folded note in my jacket pocket after I got home, crayon drawings of cupcakes, hearts, and stick figures labeled, "Me plus Grandpa." One Thursday evening in late February, Nate and Bree invited me over for dinner. "Just family," Bree had said, "no business talk." I brought a bottle of wine that Margaret had always loved and a lemon pie from the bakery. The table was set beautifully, candles flickering against the walls. Lily darted around the room, chattering about her day at school and how her teacher had let her bring in a tray of Sweet Briar cookies for the class. Bree served roast chicken with rosemary potatoes, and for a while, everything felt simple: laughter, warm food, and the smell of bread from the cooling rack in the kitchen. After dessert, Nate leaned back in his chair and said, "You know, Dad, business has been better than ever lately. Those pop-up events we've been doing on Saturdays are bringing in great money." I smiled, glad to hear it, but something in the way he said, "pop-up events," caught my attention. I had never seen anything about them in the weekly reports they sent me. "Pop-ups?" I asked casually. Bree nodded quickly. "Just small things, nothing formal. You don't need to worry about it." She reached for her wine, but I noticed Nate's eyes flick toward hers for a split second, like they were silently agreeing on how much to say. Lily, oblivious to the undercurrent, climbed into my lap and showed me a cupcake charm she had made from clay in art class. I kissed the top of her head, letting her chatter fill the space. But in the back of my mind, that small flicker of unease had already been lit. I didn't push it, not yet. That night, as I drove home through the quiet streets, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, we were family. In March of this year, I noticed something off, small things at first, the kind you tell yourself are nothing. The vendor statement still looked clean, every invoice showing as paid. But when I compared them to our daily deposits, the numbers felt thin. It wasn't just a bad week here or there. The drops were consistent, like a slow leak you can't quite find. Tuesdays, which used to hum along respectably, suddenly looked like quiet Sundays. Meanwhile, according to Instagram, Sweet Briar was thriving. Bree's stories showed lines snaking out the door, trays of pastries vanishing within an hour, and customers laughing over cappuccinos. The online world was full, but our bank account looked half empty. One Thursday, I stopped by unannounced to drop off some paperwork. The front case was nearly sold out by noon, which should have meant a record day. But when I checked the bank deposits later, the number didn't match, not even close. Then came the first real slip. Our coffee supplier called me directly, politely reminding me that our last payment had been a little later than usual. Nothing alarming on its own, but I've learned to listen when suppliers start using qualifiers. I began asking quiet questions. Not to Nate or Bree, not yet. I started with the staff, the overnight baker, a reliable woman named Carla who had been there since before the pandemic. She mentioned, almost casually, that they had started doing cash-only pop-ups on Saturdays. No card reader, no square, just a tin box under the counter. Cash only? I asked, keeping my tone light. Yep, she said. Bree says it keeps things simple. She went back to rolling dough, but the words stuck with me. Sweetbriar had always bragged about being fully contactless. Even the health inspector once commented on how modern their setup was. Switching to cash only for anything was not keeping it simple. It was changing the rules. The following week, I asked Bree for the pop-up ledger. She didn't miss a beat, smiled wide and said, "Oh, we're just keeping it flexible for tax efficiency." The phrase was so practiced it might as well have been rehearsed. I have been on this earth too long to mistake theft for efficiency. And now the pattern was clear: cash-heavy weekends, smaller than expected deposits, and no formal record of the extra sales. That night, I pulled out the operating agreement from my file cabinet and read clause number 6 again, the right to replace management upon missed vendor payments or material diversion of receipts. I wasn't ready to swing the hammer yet, but I knew where it was hanging. It was time to find out exactly what these pop-ups were. The next Saturday, I left my house before dawn and drove the long way into town so they wouldn't see my truck coming down Main Street. I parked 2 blocks over and walked the rest of the way, blending into the early morning foot traffic. The pop-up was set up under a white canopy just outside the bakery, with folding tables covered in pink gingham cloth. Bree was behind one of them, hair perfectly curled, wearing an apron with "Sweetbriar" stitched in gold across the front. Nate floated between tables, laughing and clapping old customers on the back like a politician on market day. The line stretched nearly to the corner. The air smelled like cinnamon, butter, and fresh coffee. Every time someone reached the front, Bree would lean forward with a bright smile and say, "We're cash only today, hope that's okay." No one seemed to mind. A mason jar stuffed with bills sat between the pastry trays, and a smaller tin box was tucked beside it, lid closed. I noticed they didn't have the bakery's usual point-of-sale system set up, not even the little square reader they used for farmers' markets. I lingered near the back of the line, pretending to browse a rack of potted herbs from the neighboring stall. From there, I watched transaction after transaction. $10 here, 20 there. One woman handed over a 50 for a box of croissants, and Bree slipped the change from a wad she kept in her apron pocket rather than the jar. By the time I saw my 5th big bill disappear into the tin without a single note being written down, I knew exactly what was happening. They weren't just skimming a little. They were running an entire side operation, completely off the books. The clincher came when a regular customer I recognized from weekday mornings asked if he could just tap his card like usual. Nate's smile froze for a half second before he said, "Oh, the machine's acting up today, cash only." The man shrugged and pulled a 20 from his wallet. Nate slid it straight into the jar without looking toward the bakery's open door, where the register sat idle. I walked away before either of them spotted me. My coffee stayed untouched in my hand the whole drive home. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping or a temporary workaround. This was deliberate. That afternoon, I pulled the vendor payment history again. 2 suppliers had been paid late in the last quarter, something I hadn't been told. Then came the champagne night. They called it my retirement from active involvement, as if the bakery had been my 9-to-5 instead of the lifeline I'd thrown them. The dinner was at a little place on the corner, Edison bulbs strung across the ceiling, mismatched chairs, and a chalkboard menu written in careful, loopy handwriting. It was the kind of place that serves water in glass milk bottles and charges extra for bread. Nate was already seated when I arrived, his jacket neatly folded over the back of his chair. Bree waved me over, her smile wide, her nails painted the same pale pink as the cupcakes on Sweetbriar's Instagram. There was a bottle of champagne chilling in a bucket at the center of the table, beads of condensation dripping onto the linen. "To Dad," Nate said once my glass was full. He raised his own and touched my shoulder like I was made of fragile glass. "We love you, but we need to modernize. Keep things fresh. Make sure Sweetbriar is ready for the next generation." I let him talk. Bree slid a folder across the table, the pages neatly clipped together. The top sheet had a bold title, Advisory Role, and bullet points underneath. The second bullet caught my eye, No unilateral decisions by majority owner without consensus. Cute. I read the rest in silence. They had dressed it up in friendly language, but the meaning was plain, they wanted me out of the driver's seat. I could still sit in the car, but I'd be in the back, looking out the window while they handled the wheel. I raised my glass, swallowed a mouthful of foam, and said simply, understood. The rest of the evening was small talk and shared dessert, but under the hum of conversation, I could feel a current pulling in a direction they hadn't told me about. Their smiles were warm, but their eyes were careful, measuring how much I'd push back. I didn't. Not yet. 2 nights later, I sat in my den with the operating agreement spread out on my desk. Clause 6 stared back at me like an old friend, the right to replace management upon 2 consecutive missed vendor payments, or material diversion of receipts. I set a yellow legal pad beside it and started a list of every odd deposit, every late payment, every unexplained pop-up date I'd heard about. I called a public accountant I'd worked with back in my warehouse days, a quiet, meticulous man named Harold who believed numbers told the truth if you knew how to listen. I told him I wanted 1 week of focused work on Sweetbrier's books, cross-checking every vendor statement, tax filing, and deposit slip against actual receipts. He didn't ask why. He just said, send me everything. The next morning, I picked up Lily for what I told Nate and Bree would be grandpa camp, a week of movies, pancakes, and sleeping over at my place. They didn't question it. That was the last thing I wanted them to do. Harold worked the way I liked, quiet, thorough, and without fanfare. No flurries of emails, no dramatic sighs. Just short calls every evening, each one adding another stone to the pile. Walter, he said on the second night, your vendor statements match the invoices on paper, but the payment dates don't always match the ledger entries. 2 different coffee deliveries were recorded as paid the same day, yet the checks cleared nearly 3 weeks apart. Late? I asked. Not just late, deliberately staggered. Enough to keep the account looking clean at a glance. I made a note. That was 1 step closer to Clause 6 territory. By the 4th day, Harold had a printout waiting for me at his office. He laid it flat on his desk like it was an autopsy report. This, he said, tapping the column on the right, is what they reported to the state for sales tax each week. And this, he tapped the left column, is what the bank shows as deposits. The difference wasn't a rounding error. It was a canyon. Week after week, hundreds, sometimes thousands, of dollars in unreported sales. And in every instance, the shortfall lined up perfectly with the Saturdays they had called pop-up days. Any chance this is sloppy bookkeeping? I asked, because I needed the answer to be honest, even if I already knew it. Harold didn't even look up from the paper. If it's sloppy, it's the neatest sloppiness I've ever seen. They're removing cash before it hits the register. The only records are the flour and sugar that vanish faster on pop-up weeks. I sat back in the chair. You're certain? As certain as I am about my own name, he said. That was all I needed. I didn't want to be wrong. I didn't want this to be a misunderstanding I'd regret. But the numbers were clean, consistent, and damning. If anyone else had brought me this data, I would have called it theft without blinking. I left Harold's office with the printouts in a manila folder under my arm and a plan forming in my head. If they wanted me in an advisory role, then I'd give them one, advising them right out of the driver's seat. But first, I was going to change the locks. That week with Lily at my house confirmed more than Harold's numbers ever could. On the second morning, over pancakes, she told me in that unfiltered way children have, Mommy says when we do the pop-up, we don't tell you about it because you'll make a fuss. She said it with a giggle, like it was a harmless secret, but it landed heavy in my chest. Another day, I took her to the park, and she asked if we could stop by the bookstore after. She picked up a small hardcover about space exploration, $8. She hugged it like treasure. But as I reached for my wallet, she whispered, "Daddy says we can't buy books because books don't make money." On Wednesday night, I tucked her in on the couch, and she asked if I could make my big spaghetti for her birthday this year. When I asked why we wouldn't have it at the bakery like last year, she shrugged and said, "Mommy says birthdays at the bakery are only for customers who pay for the party." The words were simple, but the picture they painted wasn't. Her parents weren't just siphoning money, they were squeezing every drop of sweetness out of their own child's life unless it came with a price tag. The last straw came Friday evening when Bree called to check in on Lily. She didn't ask how school was or what we'd been doing. She only asked if Lily had mentioned the pop-ups to me. When I said no, her voice softened into that sugar-sweet tone she used when trying to sound casual. "It's just better for everyone if we keep the business side separate from family, you know." I hung up without answering. Because I did know. I knew exactly what they were doing, and I knew it had nothing to do with protecting the family. By the time Lily went to bed that night, I had already arranged for Harold's full report to be couriered to my attorney. I wasn't going to let her grow up thinking this was how family behaved, smiling to your face while quietly skimming the till. I woke up that Monday morning without an alarm. Years of construction work had trained me for early starts, but this one carried a different weight. The air outside was still dark, the kind of quiet that belongs to foxes and milk trucks. I loaded my truck with a small toolbox, a thermos of coffee, and a plain cardboard box. Inside the box were the new locks, a set of fresh keys, and the letter my attorney had prepared over the weekend, formal notice of management replacement. I'd read it 3 times, just to be sure every word was necessary and nothing was crueler than it had to be. I parked in the alley behind the bakery. The old lock came off clean, and the new one slid into place with a satisfying click. I swapped out the front lock, too, just in case. When I stepped inside, the overnight baker, Carla, looked up from the cooling rack. She didn't even flinch. "I figured something was coming," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You'll still have a job," I told her. "Maybe even a raise." She smiled for the first time in weeks. "Then I'll get the coffee going." By 6 o'clock, I was behind the counter, the smell of fresh croissants filling the shop. I set the cardboard box beside the register, my attorney's letter neatly on top. The plan was simple: let them see me here, let them read the paper, and make it clear the decision was already made. At 8 o'clock, the bell above the door jingled. Nate stepped in, Bree a half step behind. They froze when they saw me. "Dad," Nate said slowly, "what are you doing here?" "Replacing management," I said, my voice even. I slid the letter toward them across the counter. Bree glanced at the heading and let out a sharp breath. "You can't just." "I can," I said, "and I am." Clause 6. 2 consecutive missed vendor payments. Material diversion of receipts. Your pop-up cash box wasn't as invisible as you thought. Nate's face went pale. Bree's lips pressed into a hard line. They didn't move to pick up the letter, so I set a fresh key on top of it. "This is for access during the transition period. You'll get your distribution when the books are closed. Until then, you're not running Sweet Briar." Bree's voice shook, not with fear, but fury. "You're destroying your own family." "No," I said. "I'm saving what's left of it for the only one in this family who hasn't lied to me." That was when Carla stepped forward with 2 steaming cups of coffee. She handed one to me, the other to Nate, though he didn't take it. By the time they left, the letter was in Bree's hand, the key still sitting on the counter. I didn't expect them to use it. I had already made the next call, to a man named Costa, who owned Poppy and Rye 4 blocks over. He had been waiting for this day longer than they knew. Costa came that same afternoon. We walked the kitchen, and I showed him Harold's clean set of numbers, the real ones. He made his offer, 1.6 times trailing revenue, cash. I added 2 conditions, a 5-year scholarship fund for Lily, and a job for Carla with a raise. He agreed without blinking. That evening, my attorney sent the drag-along notice to Nate and Bree. They had 5 days to join the sale or be forced to sell. Their replies came fast, angry, pleading, but they were just noise now. The sale closed on Friday morning. The wire hit my account before lunch. By dinner, the scholarship fund was live and funded. Costa's crew put up a fresh sign, under new ownership, Poppy and Rye at Sweetbriar. Lily and I walked past the shop on Saturday. She waved at Carla through the window and bit into a cinnamon not the size of her hand. She didn't notice the new sign, and I didn't point it out. Some people think revenge is about making noise. For me, it's about making sure the right people eat well, learn well, and sleep well, while the wrong people have to live with what they did. It has been 6 months since the sale, and the world has gotten smaller in the best way. My mornings start with coffee on the porch, sometimes with Lily curled up beside me under a blanket, still in her pajamas. On Saturdays, we walk to the bakery, yes, it still smells the same, and sit at the corner table by the window. Costa always sends over an extra pastry, on the house, and Lily always eats half of mine without asking. The scholarship fund sits in a separate account at the bank, earning interest and waiting for the day she decides what she wants to be, an astronaut, an artist, or maybe a baker who understands what integrity tastes like. Sometimes we log into the account together, and she grins at the growing number like it's a scoreboard. Nate and Bree keep their distance. They send holiday cards with polite handwriting and sign them from all 3 of them. I write back with short, kind notes. We don't talk about Sweetbriar. We don't need to. Lily talks about it, though. She tells me the cinnamon knots are even better now, that Carla teaches her how to braid challah, and that Costa lets her stand behind the counter if she washes her hands first. I tell her those are good rules, and she tells me good rules are important. There's a lightness to life now, no ledgers gnawing at my mind, no quiet wondering about where the money is going. Just a little girl who thinks her grandpa can fix anything, and a man who has finally learned that sometimes, the best revenge is making sure the people who deserve better actually get it. If Margaret were here, I think she'd approve. She'd probably shake her head at the trouble, but then she'd look at Lily and smile that quiet smile of hers, the one that meant, yes, this is the right way. And on those mornings when the air is cool and the sunlight comes in low through the kitchen window, I feel that smile too, like a blessing that never quite fades.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to the story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.